Welcome to the Real News Network, the most reliable name in news. We will begin this tremendous newscast with a recap of this huge war where communism battled democracy.
The war started on June 25, 1950, when an estimated 75,000 of North Korea's People's Army, as well as about 100 Soviet-made tanks, poured across the 38th parallel, the border between North and South Korea.
Sounds like they need a wall to me.
The North Koreans were supported by Communist China and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republicans, or the USSR.
Most of South Korea's support came from the United States. 3 years of fighting resulted in a stalemate today.
When Korea was liberated from Japanese control at the end of the Second World War, the United States and Soviet Union agreed temporarily to divide Korea at the 38th parallel.
This division resulted in the formation of two countries, Communist North Korea, supported by the Soviets, and Democratic South Korea, supported by the United States.
5 years after the state was formed, the communist leader of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, decided to attempt to reunify Korea under its control.
On June 25, 1950, Kim launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. Believing that the Soviet Union had backed the invasion, United States President Harry Truman and his advisors followed through on their policy of containment, refusing to allow communism to spread anywhere in the world. Within 2 days of the invasion, the United States had the United Nations Security Council declare support for South Korea. An American-led UN coalition deployed to South Korea.
By August, North Korean forces had swept across almost all of South Korea. American forces only held a small defensive perimeter in the country's southeast, near Busan. In September, however, the United States launched a bold counteroffensive, including a daring amphibious landing in a territory held by North Korean forces at Incheon. On South Korea's western coast, soon U.S. forces drove the North Koreans back to the border at the 38th parallel.
The Truman administration made the decision to proceed across the 38th parallel into North Korea, but in late November 1950, as America and UN forces neared the Chinese border, leaders in Communist China sent tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers streaming into North Korea due to the fear that the United States might invade, and drove the UN and American forces southward, back across the 38th parallel. By spring 1951, the Americans had pushed to the 38th parallel once again. That same spring, President Truman fired General MacArthur, and MacArthur publicly challenged the administration's strategy. The next 2 years were that of fierce fighting, but the border held. In 1953, an armistice established a status quo antebellum border near the border that had originally divided North and South Korea.
The North Korean army had an estimated total of 135,000 troops, and the South Koreans had around 95,000 troops.
As well as their own troops, the South Koreans had troops from UN members, which totaled to over 1.5 million troops. The date was July 27, 1953, and the nastiest, the worst, the hugest war in Korean history has just ended. Officials from South Korea and the United States met with those of Communist North Korea and China to negotiate the armistice. We bring you some exclusive video of the peace talks.
Pitched beside a rice field at Panmunjom, a small tent was used as the meeting place for the Korean truce talks liaison officers. Discussions between the United Nations team and the Communist representatives resulted in success. The suspended negotiations were to be resumed, and an agreement to this effect was signed by both sides. A few days later, the Red General Nam Il led his delegation to the site, followed by the United Nations party under Admiral Joy. Soon afterwards, it was reported that the Communists had at last agreed to a ceasefire position related to the existing battlefront, but there were still complications.
The armistice was split into 5 sections. In the first section, lines were drawn on the 38th parallel where North and South Korea have agreed upon a demilitarized zone, or DMZ. Both countries plan to keep armed guards on the DMZ at all times to prevent infiltration by the other.
In the second session, we will talk about the ceasefire. The ceasefire stated that within 72 hours of being signed, all militaries as well as their equipment and supplies must withdraw from the DMZ. After the 72-hour period, a 45-day period started to be used to clear all hazards from the area surrounding and on the DMZ.
The third section that we will discuss is releasing of prisoners of war, or POWs. After 60 days of the armistice agreement, all prisoners of war shall be released from both sides of the conflict and handed over in groups to their respective sides.
In order to further resolve the conflict, the fourth section suggested that elected officials from both states arrange to meet within 3 months after the war to talk about becoming one nation-state as they previously were.
The fifth section we will discuss is about miscellaneous topics about the armistice. The terms of the armistice were mutually agreed upon by the commanders of both sides. The armistice agreement will stay in effect until both parties agree upon revisions.
Both the North and the South wanted the entire country of Korea to be unified. However, they each wanted to have their own form of government to stay in control. By signing the armistice, they both gave up on unifying Korea.
We at the Real News Network, the most reliable name in news, know that the armistice is not a permanent solution to this conflict, but we hope that it may help to unify the country of Korea and keep the peace.